genuine stuff.
Yeah, like I think the first thing, because, all right, so for, I don't know, viewers, the context, right, like you were just talking about being watched, and like, it reminds me of how like, so one of the big topics we've been talking about this weekend is the idea of conforming to societal expectations versus kind of like this realization of what your own personal wants, desires, passions are apart from what other people tell you. And I think that like, so there were some like classes I took in college where we talked pretty extensively about this idea of a kind of governmental power or societal power that comes not from the places that we traditionally think of power as coming from. So normally, like if we think about an authoritarian government, say like Nazi Germany or like communist China or something, right? They'll be like, we'll throw you in prison because you're thinking the wrong things, you're saying the wrong things. There's this very explicit rules around what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do and say. And there's punishments for that, right? So this kind of like hard power comes from institutions like the government, prisons, the military, from like, strangely enough, hospitals who will lock you up and throw you in like a little, you know, hospital cell if you're behaving in ways that they would deem to be like, you know, unnatural or whatever. But we're so used to thinking about control and power from this very hard perspective that we don't notice the institutions of power that primarily control what is considered normal and what's considered desirable. And I think today, the things that have the most power to dictate like what we want are really corporations with big advertising campaigns. And I think that like a lot of the things that we chase and a lot of things that we get told by other members of society, our family members and our close friends to want, are really the result of just subscribing to certain beliefs that get instilled in us. And these beliefs are typically beneficial to like people that want to make money off of it, you know?
Yes, of course. And I guess like, because you mentioned like, you said hard kind of, what was the second word?
Hard power versus soft power.
I was going to, because I was like, what I was thinking in my head, it was like soft powers. So hard power is kind of like, it's very explicit. Like these are the laws, the punishments and whatnot. But then soft power, like you said, comes in the form of, it's like implicitly implied that, oh, it's like, you know, the Coke commercial comes on and it's like, get like a sip of happiness, and it's showing like a family with like a dog and like in front
and you're like, nice, dude, I need a dog. Like, you know,
And then it's like, oh, or, you know, like subtle remarks from people where it's like, oh, like you're wearing like Nike over like Skechers. And it's like all of those sort of soft forms of power or control where it's like, it's not explicitly being enforced, but like you sort of feel like that need to conform, that is just, it's not necessarily being reinforced by a collective, but just like literally by individuals.
And I think like the second step to how we enforce like this, so we basically get to know these unspoken rules of society, right? That are like more like external pressures. But I think that once we've internalized them enough, this is the part about like the being watched thing. Is there was this dude named, oh my God, what was his name? He was like this French Canadian guy. But he came up with like this concept called soft biopower, where he was like, basically it is the decision, like it is the ability to influence like a group, like a whole society of people that on one hand they form the collective, but on the other hand, the collective, once it's internalized enough, the collective is no longer necessary. Because we will start to watch ourselves. So even when other people aren't watching us, like you have that interaction where with your friends and they're like, oh dude, it's so uncool that you wear Nikes, you know? So you have that interaction, you're being watched by your friends, but then your friends are gone. You're at the store, you know, and you're subconsciously feeling like, oh my God, am I uncool if I like buy Nikes? You know, and like, and your behavior completely apart from people watching you becomes a thing that you do to yourself.
Yes.
And so then the people who are in power, who, you know, if we go back to like hard power versus soft power, in hard power, they have to invest resources into like hiring police or, you know, doctors in the hospital or whatever it is to watch you.
Yep.
You don't need to be watched at this point because you're so self-conscious and like thinking about like what you're doing all the time and how you're going to be perceived. That you're doing what they want you to do without anybody needing to pay for it.
It's like a well-oiled machine at that point.
Yeah.
Like once it's like got momentum, it just never stops.
Yeah. And because it's soft and because it's like not, you know, somebody's coercing you to do it, you begin to think that this is actually what you want.
Yes.
And you internalize it, you know?
Yeah. And my question to you there is so when you were growing up, at least, do you have any sort of examples in like your own experience of this sort of soft power that you were led to believe or that you kind of carried throughout your life?
I'm going to have to think on that one a little bit. I feel like, well, here's the biggest one that comes to mind immediately.
Okay.
I really wanted other people to think I was smart.
Okay.
So, for context, when I was in 6th grade, there was like our school had like this, you know, different tiers of like gifted programs, right?
Yeah, yep.
And like the top like gifted program tier was called PI plus, and it was like this like shining thing at the end of the rainbow that like my parents were like, Chris, you've got to get into PI plus. So we had to take like these like cognitive tests and like things like that, you know, study for them and like, you know, get really good at that. And when you get into this program, it's this strange alternate universe from like the rest of the world. Where most kids, when they're in 6th grade, they really want to be cool and they want to fit in and they want to like, I don't know, they want to like do cool things that like cool kids do, you know?
Yes.
It was almost like a cruel social experiment. So they took the 50 kids in the entire school district of like, I don't know, 8 to 10,000. There were 50 of us. Okay. They all collected us from all the different schools and they put us in the same school where we were also like in the same school with other normal kids. Like there were like normal kids in the school too. But they bought a mobile trailer park thing for us.
Gosh, yeah.
And they put us all in this trailer that was like a separate building from the rest of the school. And we were just like weird kids in this trailer together. And I think that, you know, a lot of them were Asians. Most of them, I think, came from families where there was a lot of pressure to academically excel and to be smart or whatever that meant. And so there was a lot of like low-key competition for people to like look smarter than like the other people. And like, you know, I think that I felt greatly insecure about not being as smart as the other kids because the truth is I did not naturally excel in like a classroom environment. I was like, I have ADHD, which made it really hard for me to like focus and I think to engage in like, I think what's a very disciplined and kind of like less about exploration and curiosity and more about learning the things that they tell you to learn. And so I felt like other people thought I was like not smart or like dumb. And so it was like really important for me to find ways to convince myself and to like convince others that like I was still a smart person and nothing made me feel more validated than like, you know, some of my friends or even people who weren't my friends saying things like, you know, even though Chris doesn't get the best grades, he's actually really smart. And I would feel like so like, oh my God, that's it, you know? So I think that, you know, out of that comes this, which I think many other people might find relatable. Is like the culture of I didn't study that hard, but I still did well. Or the like, oh, school is so easy, dude. Like, I don't, like, you know, it's like, and And also when you do badly, like, oh, it's because like I just didn't take it seriously enough. It's not that I'm stupid. It's I just didn't try. And so like that's why I got the bad grade.
Yep.
And so I think that whole culture was something that definitely really affected me and was part of my struggle to fit in as an adolescent.
Gotcha. And I have a few thoughts there to say, to some general observations where it's like, again, it's sort of like, since you were operating this sort of like entirely separate ecosystem within like the regular function of a school.
Yeah.
And like, I noticed that you mentioned like in your like verbiage, like normal, weird.
Yeah.
But for you, like your mobile trailer park was your normal.
Yeah.
And everyone outside of that was quote unquote, like that was their normal. And it's like by being placed in those different ecosystems, your measures of like self-worth and validation were inherently different.
Very different.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think most people are afraid of being a nerd.
Yeah.
But like we were like, it was all about who was the smartest, you know?
That's so interesting. Okay. And I'll provide my experience in a second. But I guess like for me then, so for you, it's because again, I feel like grades are such an easy pointer, especially like in like our youth where it's like, we don't really know better. Like what is like a measure of intelligence? So it's like, oh, it's like this, again, it's like a predefined, like you said earlier, like a hard, like a sort of like a hard power thing where it's like, oh, grades are the rules, or like
the teachers enforce it.
Exactly. It's like that equals smart or intelligent. So then I guess like in those situations where kids were like, oh, you don't get the best grades, but Chris is smart. It's like, what do they mean by smart? Like, I mean, like what were you doing that had those kids saying like you're smart or intelligent?
Yeah. I think this is so funny because I think that I've never really considered how it may have even started that early.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that I was really good at was explaining material to other kids.
Yes.
So that was like, that's still within the confines of school. And so it's close enough to these rules around who's smart based on grades and, academic subjects that, if I was able to help other kids with their homework or explain to them a problem that they didn't know how to do, you would be seen as smart.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that really ended up motivating me to try to reject grades as a measure of smartness. Okay. And when it came to at least how I engage with my academics, to really focus on conceptual understanding. So whether that was like a physics thing, like it was like, not to me about having all the formulas memorized so I could plug them in.
Yeah.
But like, I think there were definitely times where I would kind of like rederive formulas, like as I was taking a test, because it was based on the like, oh, this is a model for like how projectile motion happens in like X and Y directions, right? Or like, people will like come up with like mnemonics to memorize like which trig function do you use for what? But I would literally be like, no, we're trying to find like the vertical, like how fast the ball falls versus like how far it travels.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, and so, like I would kind of think that way and work backwards from like, not just like, oh, I see a problem. Like that means that we have to use this formula. It would be like much more of like what we're really trying to figure out is these things that I think encouraged me to approach learning from a much less like memorization standpoint and much more from an understanding standpoint.
It's interesting for me to hear because I very much agree where I feel like, using words like smart or dumb is so pointless, where it's like ultimately it's about how well do you actually understand something. Like that's really what I feel it's about. But in my own experience, because like right now I can say as an adult and like whatnot, that I'm the same way where it's like I want to fully understand something. And for me, growing up in the school system, despite that's how I just am as a person, I seek to understand, like really try to like not just like plug and chug. The way that I was raised, particularly with my own upbringing and the environment I was in, was just like memorize everything. It's like you have a cheat sheet. It's like, oh, this formula comes up.
Yeah.
Use this formula.
And you're not rewarded for understanding.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
Because it was literally, I mean, I'm sure we'll get to college later, but I took finance and did finance and like the business courses, and like so many of those classes was just like you memorize the information and then just gone the next day. But at the same time, it was like I was able to, like you said, like explain like the different concepts and whatnot to my peers, but in the sense that it was still, that wasn't what was rewarded. It was like, okay, like you were able to read this word problem and know that like, oh, when they say this, you have to use this formula or like do this sort of like, like operation and whatnot. Yeah. Which was just such a such a pointless.
Yeah.
Again, it's like, oh, like that is like, it's like people are like, oh, you're so smart. I'm like what? Like,
it's not rewarded grades wise.
Yeah.
I think is the key thing. Like,
Yeah.
I think about how, measures of intelligence are usually like, people are like, oh, they got these grades, they got this test score, they went to this school and got, I think we have a collective understanding of intelligence as based on education.
Yes.
And like, what I was trying to share about was that like I kind of bought into that when I was like in 6th grade, right? Like I really was like, that's why even understanding was still through this lens of like, but I'm smart because I can explain these, homework questions to my friends. And I think that, so you've heard a little bit about how how I'm now a chef, and that transition there kind of happened during the pandemic for me.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, especially my family, kind of had like that, and even my like wife actually, kind of been like, well, don't you feel like you're wasting your like cognitive abilities? Like, don't you feel like you could be doing something that uses your like intelligence and your like academic giftedness a little bit better? And I think that we privilege intelligence as specifically a kind of academic ability that I think doesn't take into account that there are many different kinds of intelligence.
Yep.
One that you'll hear very often in the corporate business world is EQ. Like it's all about the EQ. Because,
which people lack, by the way.
Yes. But there's great books and resources from Harvard Business Review about how to develop it, which I think is true. I also think that in all kinds of intelligence, I very much am a growth mindset believer.
Likewise,
like you put in the time and the investment into developing it, and you'll get better. But like I also think about things that like people would be like, oh, they're like dumb. Like jocks are dumb. Nerds are smart. And like you like meet people like, I don't know, like John Cena.
Yeah.
Who's actually this hilarious guy.
Yeah.
Who has like, I mean, his accent is god awful, but his Chinese vocab is better than mine. Like by quite a long shot, actually. And like there's a thing where we're like, yo, like everybody recognizes that somebody who can speak a lot of languages like that definitely requires intelligence.
Yep.
And you've got like big dumb white man with big muscle, like speaking fluent Chinese, and people are like, what? Like, but like I think the truth is that the other stuff he did, whether it was like WWE, like pro wrestling, like that's both in like acting intelligence in terms of like there is so much acting that goes on in WWE of like how you're going to respond to things, how you feel the crowd, how to get people hyped up, as well as obviously just, I think like spatial intelligence of like knowing, like the stunts that they pull are like not easy to pull, like that requires a lot of athleticism and a lot of discipline and practice. And so I think it's like, I think people in all different sorts of careers have, even the ones that people, they're like, oh, it's blue collar, or it's like not like all intellectual. They tend to be like, must be less intelligent. But I highly disagree with that.
And before I even like respond, I feel like my question to all of that, then I feel like we have to get clear on like what is intelligence then, because I think like at least from like my understanding, like based off what you said, and I kind of have the same sort of mindset where I feel like we can equate intelligence to your ability to master whatever it is that you choose to pursue. Because again, in the pursuit of mastery, it's like you have to, like you said, have like a growth mindset. You have to be able to put in like the reps and like whatnot, and in your own chosen path, whether it's like cooking or WWE or public speaking, whatever it may be, it's like there are certain nuances to the craft that you have to learn, practice, and ultimately master, where then you can become quote unquote like intelligent in this area.
Yeah, I think that like maybe more broadly we could translate in like intellectual smartness or just in smartness in general sorry, like I think what I'm trying to say is that smartness is not only intellectual.
Agreed,
it can be many things.
Yeah.
It is pursuit of mastery.
Yeah.
And the ability to gain that mastery.
Yep.
And I think that, like, you know, that brings me to this more uncomfortable question for me, which is then, you know, are some people smarter than others?
Okay.
And I think most people would be like, yeah, like, you know, there are some people that are smarter and some people that aren't. And we're kind of talking about, not in this primarily like just intellectual sense, but like in each thing, right? Like not everybody can be John Cena when it comes to WWE. Like not everybody can be the best basketball player or the best chef or whatever it is. But I think here's where, you know, to take full circle back to what I was talking about, how intelligence was really valued in my like middle school community, of like I feel like less of a person when I feel like I'm not as intelligent as other people, right? So as you mentioned, I really enjoyed classical music. I really enjoyed all of these things. And there was a lot of joy in the pursuit of mastery in these different areas. But everywhere you look, there's always going to be people who are better at the thing that you think you're good at than you are, right? Yeah. And some people are better than you having put in less effort as well.
Yep.
That's just a fact.
Yeah.
And so, like, we very much are kind of like, oh, like, some people probably just are, like, naturally gifted in whatever it is, which I think also really plays into this idea of intelligence as, yes, pursuit of mastery, but also how much mastery per unit effort did it take you to, like, become at the level you are in said thing.
Yeah, and well, the first point is like, again, like to all you were saying, where it's all just like we're conditioned to view intellect as like again like in the confines of academia and whatnot.
Yeah.
And everything else is just out the window. And I have some thoughts on that as well. But similar to your point, where it's like how naturally inclined are you towards whatever area you choose? Where it's like, it's like if you put in like 1 hour of, you know, input or practice, and it's like hard to measure or justify, but it's like, are you getting like 3x the return, or is like someone else who's just like baseline only getting like 1x?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's exactly a thing that we're very. That is part of how we quantify intelligence.
Yeah.
Originally, and kind of at its most like elementary level, in this like school sense of like, he only studied 1 hour and he got an A. I studied 2 hours and I got a B. You know, and it's like he must be smarter than me, right? And I think even like from our parents, who, you know, some of them are like, you have to get A's, but I think that there's also a good share of parents that are like, well, I just want you to try your best.
Yeah.
And like, I just want you to study as hard as you can, and then, you know, that's the maximum of your abilities.
Yep.
But it does mean that like there's a tacit acknowledgement that like less natural ability equals like less intelligence.
Yeah.
And
I think the difficult part there, right, where it's like, oh, like you don't have like that talent, but it's like, what if you just haven't found that talent yet? And the thing is, it's like, again, right, we're so used to viewing talent or intellect with like a certain cluster of activities or whatnot, that then it's like you dissuade people that maybe have like those quote unquote hidden talents that are very, you know, out like on the outlier side of it.
Yeah.
And they don't believe, and like again, they're not encouraged to cultivate those because they're used to being like, and the whole notion of like you want the validation, the connection, like the worthiness, that you're not going to pursue your inclinations.
Yeah, maybe because you're scared of like putting an effort, still not being that good, and feeling like you don't measure up to other people.
Yeah. And I guess my question to you then is, so you mentioned that you struggled, and I definitely have like my own struggles as well in that regard in terms of self-worth. But so you mentioned that you had a bit of, you know, struggles with your self-worth in terms of like your intellectual ability. And so you went to, and I guess like contextually, so you went to Brown to study music, and like, let's be like very clear, where call this like another form of like soft power, but like Brown is notably a quote unquote a top school.
Right.
But it's again like who is enforcing that? What, U.S. News? But it's like U.S. News. U.S. News doesn't even need to enforce it anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I just know.
Everybody knows.
Like, it's
you
like
hear the words Ivy League, and like everybody's like, "Whoa!"
It's like, you know, you could be across the world, you hear Harvard, and like you don't even know U.S. News, but you just know Harvard, and you're like, oh, it's okay, it's worthwhile. But then, in that sense, right? And I'm just like speaking very like plainly from like the eyes of just like, you know, like the average individual.
Yeah.
Whereas you hear Brown, but then you hear like music.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, clearly Brown is like an academic institution, but it's like you're pursuing a path that is not in like those typical clusters that are like valued for intellect.
Yeah.
So then people are kind of like wishy-washy. It's like, is he like smart, or is he just like, you know, like I guess like good at music? It's like
like what's going on?
Like what is he?
Yeah.
So for you, it's like, how was that? First off, I want to say like, how were you able to go into pursuing like music as an undergrad? And I asked this question out of curiosity because, given like my own experience growing up, it was like there was no possibility, just given my upbringing and just like how societal conditioning was, that I would ever consider a creative like field.
Yeah.
For like a degree or whatnot.
Yeah.
And then, so I'd love to hear about that. Yeah. And then just how was like the general sort of like reactions that you were getting towards that?
Yeah.
And like your own sort of feelings as you navigated that?
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot to unpack there. I think that, you know, to be totally honest about the origins of even considering a path like music, it started. This is not good. By the way, don't choose like your major based on resentment, okay? But like,
sure.
I think that it definitely should be based on like, you know, a sense of passion and really enjoying something, which is part of the equation.
Yep.
But I'll be honest, I was very passionate about computer science.
Yep.
As a small child, like I used to go to the library, the public library, and borrow programming books and like, you know, like make little programs and have fun with that. And I deeply resented being boxed in by society as like, oh, he likes computers. He's like one of those Asians.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I think there were a lot of other assumptions that came with it. For example, that like you were socially awkward.
Yes.
That like you didn't know how to talk to people. That you, I felt like it was overly reductionistic, and I felt like there was a lot more to me than just computer science. And so in high school, I really wanted to grow out of this shell I felt other people put me in, especially since my older sister, who was our high school valedictorian and is now a neurosurgery resident.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You know, and like got into Stanford. Like her whole life was kind of like, she's like, I want to do this, and then she would just do it. Like she would have a goal and she would succeed every time. Yeah. And I think they like people would like look at me and kind of be like, oh, so like, how does he measure up to his sister? And I think I felt like a very strong need to break away from this model that and these expectations that other people had for me.
Yep.
And it really came through the form of me kind of being like, okay, first of all, I'm not going to be one of those people that just tries to pad their college resume, you know? And I was very much like, I'm going to define myself as, you know, as we've talked about, around somebody who really sticks to their values. And so I remember I got a B in French because I refused to do the stupid vocab packets that they would make us do, where we had to fill out the vocab and then write antonyms and synonyms and draw a picture and like all this stuff. And I was like, school is for learning, and if this doesn't help me learn, I'm not going to do it.
Yep.
And so I just took zeros on every vocab packet, and I ended up getting a B because like the vocab packets were worth 10% of our grade.
Yeah.
So like
you know how to pick and choose your battles.
Yeah. You know, so I ended up getting a B, and I remember like National Honor Society was another thing that like everybody wanted to do. And I was like, mother, like, you know, because my mom was like, why don't you join National Honor Society? Like, you've got the grades, like, it looks great on your college resume. And I'm like, well, because when I went out to the informational meeting, they told everybody the point of National Honor Society is to develop like citizens who care about public service and doing things for the community and making a difference and an impact. And I was like, Mom, like, if I'm not going to do a project that I genuinely believe is intended like for those things, I'm not going to do it. Like, I want to put in the time and the effort into really making something that makes a great impact. And it's like, but I've chosen instead to devote my time to, at the time I was in Science Olympiad and I was really, really into it. I like reformed, like I like loved that, and I wanted it to be all about people who loved science when the previous culture was like resume padding. So I was basically like, I'm not going to do National Honor Society. And I told her, I was like, the truth is, like, all of the people in National Honor, I was like, the president of National Honor Society is one of my friends. And she admitted to me that she doesn't care about her project at all. But she's just doing it because it looks good on the college resumes. And I'm like, I don't want this. And, you know, similarly, my sister was the captain of like 8 different things. And so I was like, no, I think I chose 3 extracurriculars to be a part of that I felt strongly about. And one of them ended up being acting my senior year. So I joined like all of the school drama, like plays and clubs, because I like wanted to be as far away from like the, oh yeah, this kid's going to become a programmer when he grows up as possible. And I think that like that really translated into like forming these other identities for myself into when I got to college. Like I still really, really did not want to be reduced to like a programmer kid, like one of those STEM kids. And so I think a lot of it for me about pursuing something like music was identity. Like I wanted to be seen by other people, and I wanted to take hold of the identity myself that I was a creative and that I was about expressing myself and artistry and, you know, these things that were values to me. And I wanted to like say that like through a major, which is a really big part of our identity. Like, this is me, world. Like I am also like about the, you know, art, you know, for what it's worth.
First off, like, brilliant response. And like, first off, I want to say is like, hearing all that, it's like, I don't know if you or like if people told you before, like, and I'll be the one to tell you, where it's like how incredibly rare that is at your age to have that level of like self-awareness and like conviction to stick, both to define your values and to stick to your values. Because I definitely didn't, which I'll share in a second. And I mean, even now as adults, people still are not able to do that. And like, I definitely want to kind of get an idea about, you know, if you are able to explain, like, if that was just like your baseline, like that you always had that self-awareness and whatnot, which, you know, we can get to. But I guess like before I, you know, ask that, and I'll share it first, but like, what sort of like was like the split of your like school district in terms of like, you know, Asian, white, and whatnot?
Yeah, I think it was like 20 to 25% Asian. It was like 50 to 60% white. I think maybe like 10% like Hispanic and like whatever remaining. Yeah, it was like roughly those numbers.
Gotcha. I asked that question just to kind of get an idea of, you know, the breakdown, because I'll provide my own context in terms of like my experience, because I definitely relate to a lot what you said. But my school that I went to, my district, was probably like 80% white, 20% everyone else. And similar to you, like, who knows like what age you hit? I want to say like maybe like middle school or something. It's like when you start to be like, oh, like cool or normal, popular, all that. And that was really when I started to, similar to you, build this sort of need to escape this boxed in notion of what the Asian identity, particularly the Asian male identity, was. And I took a different route with that, which I'll explain. But like certainly, like, I was always a creative kid. Like I was like writing short stories, like creating like little like, you know, reenactments with my action figures, like everything. That was who I was. And I love that. But then it's, you know, you get to school and it's like, that's not what is being, you know, rewarded, or that's not looked upon as cool. And I was just due to like the environments you grow up in, like what you see in the media, I was just slowly growing resentful of my Asian identity. You know, the typical, who needs to mention it, but like for contextual sake, it's like, you know, Asian men are like weak, scrawny, like geeky, nerdy, like the programmers, like effeminate, like undesirable, all that stuff. And for me to grow up, again, in like that predominantly white community with all these pressures, and then paired with like the pressures of my parents to meet this, again, stereotypical version of the Asian male, I seriously rebelled, and it was like I was similarly like I wanted to get away from this as far as possible.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like I'm gonna pursue like athletics and
Yeah.
really quote unquote whitewash myself, which is just a terrible way to think about it. But like
Mm-hmm.
I started playing American football. I started
Mm-hmm.
playing lacrosse. I got into lifting weights and
Yeah.
all of
Right.
that.
Right.
And you know, I was still in all of like these. Somebody you said like all of, like these like whatever like the tiers of like the academic the
Yeah.
AP classes or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was in all of those while still trying to balance being an athlete, but the need for validation in
Mm-hmm.
my community, which like was predominantly white, predominantly focused on athletic, which is like I feel like a high school rite of passage.
Yeah.
The academics just sort of fell by the wayside, and I was like,
Yeah.
I need to be like the star like athlete because that's what the popular white kids are. They're the ones who get the most attention and all that.
Yeah.
And I very much felt this strong resentment towards my culture, my heritage. I very much like rejected it in
Mm.
pursuit of wanting to be the ideal, you know, version of normal in my school.
Mm.
And it really tarnished like my ability to even enjoy the things that I enjoyed growing up.
Mm.
Like for example, I went like on Sundays I went to like Chinese schools, and
Yeah.
I did like painting and whatnot. And I just like when I was at like the painting lessons,
Yeah.
I kid you not, like I was like when I would be there, I'm like, oh, I'm one of the cool Asian kids, like one of the cool Asian kids or cool Chinese kids, because like
Yeah.
like I'm an athlete.
Yeah.
These people are like beneath me and whatnot,
Mm. Mm.
and just like I literally couldn't even just like be myself
Yeah.
and like that original, true, authentic identity of like that, just like the little kid who like loved
Yeah.
art
Yeah.
in that environment. I was just constantly thinking about how I was around like
Yeah.
again like the social stacking around people around me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a really common story. And like I think a lot of other Asian Americans resonate with these feelings of trying to fit into a set of demands for how you should be that's very different from your cultures.
Yeah.
I think that one thing that is a really important part and probably the defining part of like my just growing up and what my values were was I would say, I told you before I like grew up going to church and
Yep.
stuff. But I would say that like it wasn't until I was in 8th grade that I really felt like, wait, this is actually like this is the foundation of my values.
Okay.
And of like what's important to me and of how I'm going to define like how I'm going to interact with the world. It's through this lens of this guy named Jesus and what he said is important for
Yep.
me to do and how to respond to people. And I think that, when it comes to like the more that I read the Bible, right?
Yep.
I actually found that I felt like Jesus was making it very clear to me that in the kingdom of heaven, right, in his world, in the world that he imagines, things are very reversed.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people who are rejected and who are outcasts and who are like not loved by the people of this world that we should be close to.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, there was like this great tension then, because on one hand, the person that I knew I wanted to be deep down embraced and loved and, was with all the uncool people,
Yep.
uncool people, quote.
Yep.
But then obviously I didn't want to be an uncool person.
Yeah.
And I became like this very strange kind of like floater personality that I was like, well, I never want to see myself as being, and I think whenever I felt like feelings of like, if I felt like, oh, those are the uncool kids, then I would be like, but like Jesus tells me like, everybody bears the image of God and like he loves those people as much as he loves me, as much as he loves anyone. And so I'd be like, I should be friends with these people, so I'd sit with them at lunch and I would like hang out with them.
Yep.
And even when I actively knew that like maybe the other cool kids would be like, why is he hanging out with like that uncool kid? I would kind of be like, I feel like this is like the mission. Like I feel like this is what I'm here for.
Wow.
But then at the same time, like I'd be like, well, I gotta hang out with the cool kids too,
Yeah.
because like if I'm only around uncool kids, then I'm gonna become an uncool kid.
Yeah.
I don't want to be an uncool kid.
Yeah.
You know. And I think that also very so that was so I hung out with like the cool kids a lot as well.
Yeah.
And I think that like in fact for me, I probably looked down on the cool kids a lot too in a different way, where I would tell myself, I'm like, oh, they're so shallow. Like, oh, they're like all they care about is like what other people think about them.
Yep.
And like, you know, and so this is like young Chris, like trying to work out all of these values and hold everything in balance. Yeah. And then I think the other side of me was also like, okay, but like Jesus also told me to not judge other people. And I was like, don't I do what the cool kids do? Don't I like look down on other people too?
Yeah.
And I was like, don't they just like need the same kind of love? Like, doesn't Jesus love the cool kids too? You know? And so it's like, okay, like, you know, like, and so that was like the whole tension for me socially.
Yeah.
And then, I'll leave it at that for now and address the Asian cultural things on another side.
Yeah. And then just to chime in there where that's so interesting. Like, again, similar to you, again, like I mentioned, I was sort of towing between identities, which is such a difficult thing, right? Yeah. I think that's like a defining quality of a lot of just anyone's upbringing is that you always have a sense of like what that true identity, like kind of like you referred to, that you wanted to, like that person you wanted to be in, the way you wanted to interact with the world. Yeah. But as we grow older, like we start to like get into like these, again, notions of like soft power, where it's like it's like enforcing these sort of like expectations or shoulds. Yeah. You start to develop like these alternate identities that you're constantly balancing between. Yeah. And in my sense, similarly, it was like, I was part of like the AP classes and whatnot. Yeah. I was an athlete. Right. So it's like I would sit with like my athlete teammates and like laugh and joke and like all this, honestly, the shallow stuff. Yeah. And like, they would like make Asian jokes and things like that. And I was like, I would go along with them. Haha. Yeah. And I would go along with it. But then I felt so much more comfortable and at ease and with myself when I sat, because I also sat with like the people in my classes, like the quote unquote, the geeky kids and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, it was such a hard like battle to find. I was like, okay, like I feel more comfortable with these people, but I don't want to like fully be like lumped in with them. So I'm going to sit with these people who also like just like put me down and whatnot. And like that's just such a constant, it's like you're never really able to just truly be yourself. And one thing I want to say here is that again, like just hearing your experience, it's just so admirable to me that you were able to just even have these questions and dilemmas at your age, because this wasn't like a reckoning that I had until like college. Because and I think about like what you're mentioning where, with like religion as like your backbone. So personally growing up, I wasn't religious. My family went to church a couple times, like in between the ages of like 1 to 5, but more for the community aspect. Yeah. And it dropped off. And I feel like that's the beauty of religion, where it provides like that backbone of like a set of, let's just call it what it is, like just morally like healthy and positive values that any righteous person could work towards. But for me, I didn't have that. So instead, I was just taking on whatever sort of values that either my parents were telling me or society. Yeah. Values like work hard, get good grades, like there's not like, all that stuff. Nothing at all about judging others, being kind, being compassionate and whatnot. Yeah. And the thing is, like deep down, my mom would always tell me, it was like, you were always like a gentle kid. Yeah. You were always like very compassionate. Yeah. But I didn't have like that being reinforced by anything. And like that sort of fell on the wayground as I was balancing parental expectations, peer expectations, societal expectations. Yeah. I think like a very interesting thing that I really appreciate about the Christian faith is that Jesus makes it very explicit. He's like, if you do the things that I tell you to do, people will reject you. Yep. And there was this, I think I felt like trying to wrestle with these things of loving people who other people didn't think were cool. Yep. What we've been talking about. But just valuing the world on a different basis of like not about always getting the best this or being the richest or whatever. People do
think, like, people do think less of you.
Of course.
And, you know, like, I think part of the struggle was kind of like, I was like, well, I want to break through to what I feel like. I think that people only think less of me because they're trapped by, like, these expectations that society has told them to have for themselves, and that they, you know, kind of like have passed on to other people.
Yeah.
But I was like, you know, like, I think with the cool kids, for example, in high school, there were a couple of them that I really developed, like, genuine friendships with. And who told me, like, I think one of the things I heard a lot that was very validating for me was, Chris, like, I feel like I can tell you things that I can't tell anybody else. It was one thing I heard a lot.
Yeah.
And it came from both the uncool kids and the cool kids.
Yeah.
You know? And I was kind of like, but I think that's it. I think that, like, my faith, like, that what I'm trying to do, because I think this is what Jesus told me to do. There's something true in this, because it speaks to people.
Yes.
Like, there is something at the deeper, at the core of who people are, that's like, when somebody genuinely cares about you and they aren't just evaluating you and making you feel judged, but it's like really trying to live this, like, you know, Jesus says he loves me no matter what. Like, and I'm like, okay, like, if I can try to be this for other people as well, and, like, show them a little bit of what I feel like I'm getting from Jesus, like, that's like the key. And so I think, like, you know, that's the goal. And I'm telling you about my successes, right? Like, when that went through, I think that, like, the other thing to hang in the balance was also just kind of feeling like but I want to be cool enough that people will at least listen to me first.
Yes.
You know, because, like, if I'm, like, so lame, like, people aren't going to want to hear anything I say, right? So then, yeah, like, I threw everything into, like, also, like, athletics when I joined track, and I would run until I vomited, like, every time, you know?
Yep.
Like, I really wanted to be, like, I got into lifting, I wanted to be big, like, you know, all of these things, because, like, that's one of the tickets.
Yes.
And then, like, I think one of the other tickets was, like, the whole, like, developing social skills. I didn't want to be awkward. I wanted to make sure that I was somebody who could handle stage, like, being in front of a lot of people and public speaking. So that was, like, acting and, like, you know, class speeches and things like that. And I think because I invested so much into developing these other non-stereotypically Asian and uncool sides of myself, I would get very resentful when other people thought that was me. Because I'd be like, but I'm not. You know, like, you don't know, like, how much I've put into not being the things that you think I am. And that definitely, like, the heart of that is just, like, a insecurity and like, too much value ascribed to what this random person who doesn't know me thinks that I am.
Yeah.
But,
and, like, that's crazy. Again, and I'll provide my own experience, but that's crazy to me to hear that you had that level of, like, self-awareness and ability to direct intention at that age. Because, again, like I've mentioned, I'm not a religious person, but I would consider myself a spiritual person, because I've read quite a bit of different, you know, areas of philosophy and religious texts and whatnot. And I guess that's, to me, what being spiritual is, where I've been able to form sort of my own belief system. And it aligns very much with what you were saying, where at the end of the day, right now, as a human being, it's like, I want to be compassionate, unconditionally loving, understanding, and whatnot. A lot of the things that you mentioned. And, you know, I came to this, obviously, you know, now as an adult, but and I think about it now, like, I was reflecting about this a few weeks ago, but a lot of my experiences that I had growing up unintentionally helped me cultivate these qualities. I was not intentional about it, but it helped me do so. And, like, some that stand out to me were, like, you know, I pursued athletics, but I wasn't the star athlete. But I had more time, admittedly, on the sidelines with the younger players, where I was cultivating one-on-one relationships. I was trying to serve as a mentor to them, like, help them feel, like, connected and whatnot. You know, and then it was like, okay, lifting allowed me to get, like, a, you know, like, kind of unquote, a ticket into building that one-on-one relationship with somebody, to be able to start to talk to them about stuff outside of, like, the fitness space. and then
it would start as like you're,
exactly
helping them learn how to lift.
exactly,
And it's a gateway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was the same way with me in college, whether it was I was in a business fraternity and I obviously did finance. All things that right now it's like, I'll be honest, I don't give a shit about.
Yeah.
Like, as you can tell. But it's like,
Sure.
even now it's like, I still don't mind those being like my tickets where like I'm now more cognizant of that.
Yeah.
Because it opens up the door for me to be able to have these conversations, right? And it's like,
Sure.
I see that as like the greatest blessing in my life is that I unintentionally stumbled into all these areas where there is so much conditioning, there is so much expectation and shoulds and soft power, and I'm able to navigate these through personal experience.
Right.
And it gives me the tickets to slowly plant seeds in pursuit of this, greater message that I believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, that's part of like the accepting we live in a society, and like there's some things that people are going to value, and when you have access to that, either through being lifting or being a president of your business fraternity or whatever, people who are drawn to you for one thing may be more open to hearing about what else you have to say.
And I guess like that's kind of how I feel, where it's like, again, like you said, these things are not me. Like, if you looked at my resume, or it's literally like, who the hell is this guy? This is not you. But at the same time, it's like all of these, in extent, again, unintentionally, were my ways of inadvertently creating like tickets for like my purpose and whatnot. But one thing I wanted to ask you is that, and I've had this similar conversation with friends who do, like, let's just call it what it is, like have like a higher level of like just baseline self-awareness or understanding. How was it for you navigating the just like social societal playground that is like college? With the self-awareness that you had.
My God.
Like, because before I I'll chime in here, but like my friend, the one I mentioned, his dad told him before he went to college, he's like, you're probably going to feel very like isolated and alone at times, given like your level of like self-awareness or understanding. And for like, obviously we're connected now, but I definitely wasn't this self-aware or understanding going to college. I had to like claw my way out of that, like the hole or depths of just conditioning to like awaken or to become more self-aware. And having experienced both, especially at like a later age of like, the development cycle, I'm like, holy crap, how could someone at like 18 go through like 4 years of this? Because I have like a hard time with it now as an adult.
I was deeply depressed. College was not easy for me at all. The truth is that I went into college with really, really high expectations. I think that as much as high school had its ups and downs, I think that overall, I would say, just evidence from the guys that I live with now, I had like a group of, not a cohesive friend group, but like I had individual friendships that were really, really strong and fulfilling, and just they were deep, and they were friends who I felt like I could have meaningful conversations with. And I think that a lot of that also came through, I'm gonna be honest, like my dad getting cancer. Like me and my dad were really, really close. And when he passed, I had to lean on my high school friendships a lot. And they were troopers, dude. Like, I mean, also like I felt that sense of like, okay, also a lot of them just can't relate to what I'm going through. Like, it's just hard to feel fully supported by them. But in the end, I was like, these are good friends who, what I know is that they'll stand with me through really hard times in life. And so I get to college, and my sister, she's an amazing college experience. Her freshman year roommate is like her best friend for like all of college, right? And I get to college and I'm like, I cannot wait to like develop like these lifelong friendships that are gonna be like, like I thought I was gonna like get friends that were like the ones I had in high school. I was like so excited. And day one, Brown tells me, dude, you're in a single freshman year. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I really wanted a roommate because, like, I was like, oh, they're going to be my, like, bestie. And, like, you know, so I didn't get that. And I tried to interact, I remember, with my like, neighbors in, like, the dorms around me. And I remember that first year was, like, the first time I experienced, like, just this great, like, a lot of, well, I think on one hand, a little bit of disillusionment with, like, oh, they're not that, like, I'm not really able to have a conversation with them that I would want. Or just, I felt like, you know, yeah, I think people lack self-awareness, and I would see it.
Yeah.
And I would, you know, sometimes I'd, like, try to, like, kind of, like, guide them to, like, hey, like, don't you think there's something else at play here? And, like, those friendships were, you know, and I think, like, those people would be like, no, there's, like, a lot of truth to this. But then I felt like a lot of people ended up just kind of ditching me in the sense that I wanted to really develop these longitudinal, long-term friendships with people. And I think especially at a place like Brown, a lot of people are looking to expand their networks, and they want people who are of, like, use to them when it comes to, like, career things. And I didn't care enough about those things to be a very, I guess, desirable candidate for a friend.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people didn't care about the things that I felt like I had to offer.
Yeah.
And I would say that the one friend who I've told you about, one of my very dear friends, Heidi, I met her at, like, freshman year orientation.
Yep.
And I felt like she was the only friend that I had for, like, maybe the first 2 years of college.
Yeah.
I had a brief stint with this girl that I was first really friends with, then kind of became attached to romantically, was hanging out a lot.
Yep.
At the end of first semester freshman year, she revealed that she had a long distance boyfriend, which I was just like, wow, like that's really, like, you really waited a whole semester to tell me that, because we talked about everything else.
Yeah.
But, like, I think that did not contribute because I felt like I invested so much into that relationship. I felt very discouraged. I think there were a lot of other people who just kind of became too busy with, like, their clubs and the things that they were using to climb these like, you know, setting up for their resumes.
Yeah.
And I grew very disillusioned.
Yeah.
And so my sophomore year was when I got really depressed because none of my expectations were, like, lived up to.
Yeah.
I felt like I'd invested so much in friendships where people just didn't reciprocate.
Yeah.
And I was tired of feeling like the one who was always pushing to grow these friendships that people didn't want to give back to.
Yeah.
So I was very hurt by that. And then, like, Heidi, like, found a romantic partner, which just, I understandably took up a lot more of her time. So she was, like, way less available to, like, be with me and hang out and things like that. And so I like, actually considered transferring for a while because I was like, I don't have any friends.
Yeah.
And my mom didn't understand, and she was just kind of like, but, like, you're so good at talking to new people, like, why would you not be able to make friends? And I was like, it's just hard. And, you know, at the same time, my high school friends who I tried to keep in touch with, a lot of them kind of stopped responding to me as well because they were going through their own college journeys. And I just felt ghosted by everybody on all sides. I felt very alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, well, first off, like, I appreciate you for sharing and being vulnerable. And you saying that reminds me of, and I'll kind of chime off what you were saying, but in a different sense. I remember, like, my high school, my senior year, I had, like, my own sort of experience where I was a part of, like, a loose friend group.
Yeah.
But ultimately sort of, like, ostracized myself out of, like, jealousy and resentment. Like, I just, like, feel like that just, like, crippling feeling of, like, feeling abandoned and alone. And I can't imagine to go through that for yourself in your instance, but that feeling of just, like, isolation and whatnot, especially, like, at a young age, and especially paired with the expectation that is college of, like, you're gonna be surrounded by friends, like, you're gonna, like, have, like, the best time of your life. It's like, oh, like, if I'm not meeting this ideal or expectation, then it's because of me.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm the one at play here.
Yeah.
Like, I should transfer, I should do, I need to take, it's like, and like that affects like your own self-worth and esteem and which in that case, I'm curious to hear about how it was like later on in college, but similarly, I think that's like just something just like talking to you, it's like it just seems like the easiest way to encapsulate this is like you've always been sort of ahead in terms of your life cycle or in terms of like life stages at like it's like that whole thing. It's like mature for your age, but like a different level of maturity for in terms of what you were looking for. And there's always been this sort of misalignment in terms of what the normal expectation of the environment that you're in and like your personal like values and whatnot. And it seems like to what you were saying where because of your own sort of pursuits in undergrad, you didn't have the same tickets that, you had maybe in high school that would have gotten you those opportunities for friendships where I feel like given the path that I took in college, right? It was like I was in the business school. I like was still doing the same thing, like fitness. I was in a professional fraternity. I had all these tickets to at least make friends and like have that sense of, connection, cohesion. I was meeting that college expectation of what my experience would be like. But at the same time, I'd be like remiss to tell you if it was meaningful. Yeah. It was like, to be quite honest, it's like a lot of the friendships that I had in school in undergrad, I'm not really close with them anymore. I don't consider myself close, but also that's also a byproduct of my own like lack of self-awareness, which I didn't have to cultivate because I was having like expectations. I was always surrounded by people and whatnot. I didn't have to spend the time alone to develop the self-awareness to be able to facilitate more meaningful relationships.
Yeah. Well, I think my wife would really relate to what you just said of when it's going really well and you're really actually fitting in with what people are telling you should fit in with. Yeah. And especially if you actually genuinely enjoy it. Sure, I mean, which in my wife's case, she did. Like, she loved having these friends and studying and all of these things. Like, there's no impetus, as we said, there's no crisis. Exactly. Right? Yes. To cause you to be like, hey, how is my current paradigm of the way the world operates? Like, something's wrong. Like, you don't know until something is wrong. Exactly. Until you feel it. Exactly. And, I also just want to say, like, in regards to my, like, experience in college, like, those first 2 years, there were windows that kept me going of just, like, people who I genuinely respected. Like, there were some people that I think overall people were just generally very busy. But, like, there definitely were people who I felt like, well, this is a person with, like, values that I agree with, who I'd have those windows of conversations that would keep me feeling like not completely alone by myself. But I think it's that feeling of the air you breathe is air that suffocates you. Yeah. And that you wake up every day and you suffocate. And I think that was how I felt. Wow. There was a point where, like, the point that I knew my depression had gotten really bad was when there was, like, a period of, like, a couple weeks where I actually just did not leave my room. And I would just, like, I'd only leave my room to go to the bathroom and to, like, microwave instant ramen. And it was, like, not seeing people, like, in bed all day, like, no daylight in there, like, it was a rough time. And eventually, like, I was like, I need to see, like, a mental health counselor of some sort, which actually did not help. Like, school caps were, like, it was so useless. Yeah. And so that's actually when I turned to cooking. Okay. So I, like, really was kind of, like, I think I realized a couple things. One was I needed to change my expectations for how my friendships would be. Honestly, I probably won't get the same sort of friends who will, like, help me through major life crises in the way that I did in high school. I think people are busier. They have they have aspirations and they're all ambitious young people. But I was kind of like, well, I want to notice like the good qualities that there definitely are in people, and
Of course.
and recognize that the friendships, I should not have such expectations for longevity in them as well. I should expect that people will come and go.
Yeah.
But then I was kind of like, I really my new purpose that I kind of found going into junior year was, if I can just cook for people and invite them over and talk to them, like that's going to be like a really big part of my healing journey.
Wow.
Because I need to talk to people, right? Like the longer I locked myself in the room, like the worse I became, like, and just the more lonely I was and the more bitter I was. And so food was the desirable thing that was the gateway. And I got very involved with a lot of international student communities because it was the kids from Hong Kong and Malaysia who would be like, you know, like I felt very rewarded when they invited me to cook for like a Malaysian student's Thanksgiving, and one of the guys was crying. He was like weeping as he was eating because he was like, I can't go back home, and so I haven't eaten food like this in 4 years.
Wow.
And he was like, but these are my memories. This is my childhood. This is home.
Yeah.
And I found that very rewarding. And people would open up about their stories about like, oh my God, like I sat around the table with my family, like, you know, eating this kind of food, and people would come back and like the word would spread. They were like, you want good food? Like let Chris cook for you and just go hang out with him for dinner, you know? And then I found a good church, which was really important my junior year, because my freshman and sophomore year, not all churches, like a lot of churches are very, very imperfect as well.
Of course.
And a lot of them were churches that you would show up to on Sunday and you wouldn't really interact with anybody. And as soon as the service was over, you would leave.
Yeah.
And I felt like more unseen and more alone.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know why I'm even going to church. Like maybe I should stop going to church. Like, what is the point?
Yeah.
I'm not growing in my faith. I'm not growing in community. Like I was just like, they were not good places.
Yeah.
But then I found a church that really invested in me and really called me to this very, like, I think, just a vision of Christianity that I was really on board with, of like there's a lot to give up. Like we following Jesus is like this hard thing, and we have to give up in many senses, our desire for the approval and praise of other people in exchange for like the approval of God. And kind of valuing the things that he tells us to value, which are not what other people do.
Yeah.
And I was among other people who like had similar, like who are like-minded in this way, and who cared about me, who like really invested in like friendships with me and things like that.
Yeah.
And that was really, I think that church was a really key part of my social, like popping off, I guess you could say.
Okay.
As well as Heidi broke up with her friend or her, you know, like her partner. And I felt like that friendship also became a lot deeper because I was able to support her through a really difficult time, which I think is always a thing that deepens friendships, of like being there for somebody through a really hard situation.
Yeah.
And I think like I started to feel joy, and then the pandemic hit.
Oh my, yeah.
Like second semester, junior year, everything gets shut down.
Yeah.
It's a really hard semester. The depression creeps back in because I'm not seeing people. We're locked inside.
Yeah.
It's a rough time.
Yep.
And I make the determination that I cannot do online school anymore. I can't do the Zoom stuff. I'm going to get a job that is in person because that's like my lifeline.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, restaurants are places where you simply cannot do it online. Like you've got to show up and cook because you're working with physical things and you're serving people who come into the restaurant to pick things up.
Yep.
And like that was my social interaction that I held on to, you know.
Yeah.
That's where that started. And
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And this is like, honestly, this is incredible for me to hear, like just like, the origin story, because again, obviously I heard like, and now that you are in cooking, but to hear origin story is so touching to me, and I want to really dive into that deeper. But first a few thoughts is like one thing that just popped to mind like earlier through the conversation. I'm going to send you this article where it was so interesting where UCLA did this like survey of like incoming freshmen where they basically wait, like they have students fill out a survey about like what things matter to them.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, like maybe 30, 40 years ago, there was like an inflection point where being well off financially became more important than developing a meaningful philosophy for life. And kind of to what you're saying, where it's like from the get-go, you've always had like this strong sort of understanding of what you value in life and like what you want to abide by, and having to navigate an environment where that was just not the case. And when I think about my own experience in school, I realized that a lot of the, and like you alluded to, but like a lot of the communities and like activities I was involved in, were all resume patterns, and all in the name and sake of career and not necessarily living a meaningful life. You know, even the business fraternity I was a part of, it was not based on values. You know, it was just based on how can we all help each other get to this, you know, well off financially and whatnot, which is not necessarily a value. It's just like a goal, a self-serving goal in most cases. And I have a lot of different things I wrote down here, but the first I want to ask you about is, so during this time, and again, I'm just asking out of curiosity because I'm not a religious person. Yeah. But during this time where you were feeling depressed, like how was like your relationship with God? Like how did it, you know, that, like play into like your faith?
Yeah. That's such an insightful question. You know, the sermon that you heard at church this past weekend, it was very much like that psalm. Yeah. You know, it was a one of just, I was like, is God doing this to me? Like, is just, I think a lot of confusion and kind of a question of like, I know like God loves me, but I don't feel like it. And I also am beginning to question whether I actually know that God loves me. And I was kind of also like, I thought I've been through this before because the first time that happened was when my dad passed. Yeah. So I was like, you know, I kind of thought that I'd worked through a lot of this, but I think the truth is that these major life crises cause us to reevaluate and rethink every time. Yeah. And I would say that I really doubted whether God was good. I don't think I ever doubt his existence, in the sense that I've just had too many like personal life experiences where I'm like, nah, I'm like certain that he's real, but I was like not sure if he loved me and if like he was good. And I think as a result, I really withdrew from him, in the sense that I didn't pray. Yeah. And I didn't like, like I just took a lot of break from like spiritual activities. Okay. I think I mentioned I stopped going to church, right? Yeah. And I was like, I was just in this place of a lack of hope. And I think a lot of the things that Christianity offers, which are hope and are like it's a hope for the future and for like just that one day we could become like Jesus, not become him, but become like him. And I like those things that are supposed to make me really encouraged. When I was depressed, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any of it because it felt like it was taunting me. Yeah. You know? Yeah. I was like, my reality is so far from my subjective reality is so far from what I believe is an objective reality that I don't want to deal with the objective reality because it feels cruel almost, you know? Yeah. Yeah. So that's the end. That's how it was.
Thank you for sharing, by the way. And just like, again, my thoughts as someone who isn't religious, but also even like my own experience with hardship, it's like I feel like at least religion is supposed to place meaning on your hardship and struggle. Yeah. Where it's like while you're going through it in the back of your mind, you know it is for a greater good or purpose. And in those instances, it was like, well, you sort of lose sight of that, you know, because like you said, like your actual reality is so overwhelming that it's hard to. It's like in a different sense where people are like, oh, like stay positive. You know, like,
it was totally.
It's like, oh, be happy, or like, but it's like, you know that in the back of your mind, but there is so much distance between what you're actually experiencing that you find it hard to actually accept or believe in what, your faith is telling you.
I think that like kind of the thread that I held on to was the sense that like I think I did find comfort in remembering how much Jesus suffered himself.
Yeah.
And just kind of being like, okay, I don't understand. I'm not going to try to use any of the typical religious platitudes to explain my situation, but I think that Jesus understands.
Yeah.
And I think I just had this faith that like there may be a light at the like there I don't see it, and I'm not like holding out hope that tomorrow I wake up and it's the day. But it was just kind of like this belief that like Jesus would get me out of this.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
But I was kind of very much like, I leave it up to him. Like, I don't have the power to right now. Like, I don't have the mental ability. I don't have the emotional strength.
Yeah.
I cannot positivity my way out of this one.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah. And I think that I really do believe that, like, I do think that, like, God saved me. You know, I had suicidal ideations.
Wow.
I did not have like, I never attempted suicide, or at least not seriously.
Yep.
I did not like write any notes or anything, but I think the frequent feeling was like, it's better for me to not exist than for me to still like live another day.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I think that was a very dark time, but I would also say that getting out of it was a thing that, like the process of healing was something that brought a lot of restoration and deepened my convictions and confidence about my faith, because just I felt like all the things that are true about the Christian faith, like the source of what is worthy, what is a life well lived, rang even more true like after I got out of it, you know?
Wow.
And so I was like, you know, like Jesus is here to, he was there with me the whole time, even though I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And like, now that I'm out of it, like I feel it, then I feel fully back, like fully loved again. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, like that's so powerful. Thank you for being so vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an easy thing to talk about. And it's just like hearing your story is so resonant with me. And I draw so many parallels to it in a different sense. Like I've mentioned to you, like actually, like I'm a spiritual person.
Right.
And when I think about my own experience, given the different hardships and struggles I've gone through in my own life, and I think about what you said, where it's very difficult to recognize like the higher purpose or power at play, but ultimately what gives you that conviction and like that knowing, right? Where I feel like there's one thing that I've read and I believe is that, there's belief and then there's knowing. Where belief still implies that there's a level of like even a sliver of doubt that makes you question or waver, but knowing is when you experience something firsthand, that there is no doubt anymore. There's no questioning. It's like right? And I think about my own experience where, because right now it's like I really do, like again, I'm not a religious person. I don't necessarily believe in God per se.
Yeah.
But I do believe in like whatever term you want to ascribe to it. The universe, nature,
it's
like some higher power, right?
Yeah.
Like this, and this interconnectedness of this oneness with something greater than myself. And when I was going through all of my different struggles and hardships, whether it was, in my personal life, whether it was relating to like social, career, what have you, I didn't necessarily have that, faith to fall back upon.
Yeah.
I kid you not, I was just like, dude, just stay positive and persistent. That was what kept me going.
Yeah.
But I didn't have necessarily back, like, oh, this is going to be worthwhile or like in pursuit of something greater.
Yeah.
But the most recent, I guess like the most kind of like you had like this defining period of like the depths of your, I guess like distancing from faith and like the depths of your, I guess like low period. And similarly for me, that was my senior year of college where, you experience hardship in different pockets here and there.
Yeah.
But that was when I hit my lowest in terms of just like questioning everything about my self-worth and like why I was here. Like, am I even like worthy to be here and things of that nature. And I really didn't have anything to fall back upon.
Yeah.
But just kept, like, I don't know how, like, again, I think that's sometimes you don't know how you get through it.
Yeah.
But going through my own healing journey, which in my case involved a lot of unpacking of childhood trauma, anxiety, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And coming out of that on my own, because like you mentioned earlier, it's like a lot of people go to like mental health or like specialists and whatnot, which can be easily a hit or miss in that case.
Yeah.
But I went through it alone. I was just consuming, anything I could about different topics like psychology, childhood development, trauma, and things like that, and using myself as like a test case to basically like apply my knowledge and deconstruct myself and my experience, like my story and my identity.
Yeah.
And having gone through that alone, in a sense, well, at the time I believed alone.
Yeah.
It's like there's no way that like this just happened inadvertently. I had to go through everything that I did to be able to lead me to this point. Yeah. To know that there is like something greater out there that is like looking out for me. That like, it's like none of this is by chance. And it's like I've in that time, like again, because I was during senior year or whatever, and it's been like 2 years since then. It's like I still had moments where I was like, what is going, like with my first job out of school, I was like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? What is this? But going through those different hardships and then coming out the other side time and time again, and then experiencing the joy of what I didn't know lay out there, but experiencing yourself like this was it. Yeah. It instills me this deep knowing and like unwavering faith that like, everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you for giving me the space to do so.
Yeah. I think if I had a question for you, why do you think it was your senior year? Like, what catalyzed the beginning of like these feelings of like, why am I here? Like
I smile because, as it so often does, starts with a girl. It's like
my man, same.
But like I think about it, right? Because again, from like the things that I've like read and understood, like I'm not trying to claim to be like an expert or whatnot, but it's like there's a reason why things like lost friendships or like whatnot don't impact us the same way like a lost like partner or family member does, is because like there isn't that depth of connection and whatnot between the two. And the way I think about it, it's like when you pull a rubber band back, if you pull it back with whatever degree of force you pull it back with, it'll snap back the other direction. Yeah. So with like friends or acquaintances, it's a like pull. Yeah. But for me, this girl, and the thing is, what I understand now is like, and for a lot of people, it's not, and I'm not trying to diminish it, like the person, but it's like, it's not the person, it's what they represent. And for me, the girl represented validation. It represented worth. It represented like everything to me. Yeah. Because I grew up, quite honestly, feeling like my love that I received from my parents or whoever else was conditional. Yeah. It's like, it was all conditional on me doing, right? Like performing, getting good grades, upon me being an athlete, upon me being like this jacked guy, upon me like having, a high salary job and all this.
Like you have to earn it.
I have to earn it. I can't just be myself. I can't just sit here and be loved. I'm not worthy of it. I have to prove myself. Yeah. And that, like, I didn't understand that. I was like just operating on autopilot with that deep embedded trauma my entire life. Yeah. Until senior year. And the thing is, this thing with this girl was on and off. Yeah. Which is interesting, right? Because at times, like looking back when this healing journey first started, I'm like, dude, why couldn't this have happened 2 years ago? Yeah. But then I think about it now, it's like it's kind of like a video game where you have to slowly gather experience or like level up to like be capable of this, to be capable of this like higher quest, which I'm not trying to like but similar for you.
You don't have enough skill points.
Exactly. I'm like, I mean, I played RuneScape, but I was like, oh damn it, I don't have like 50 wood cutting yet. Like, it's like yeah. And it seems like similar for your case, where it's like you have to have like these slow sort of experiences where you start to like learn and like shape yourself to be at a point when you're able to take on that journey, and it's the journey of your life, and it shows up when you're ready to take it. And I think about my own life where at that point that was when I was ready to take it. I wasn't ready to take it when it didn't work out my sophomore year.
Yeah.
And I kid you not, I look at my old journal entries, and as crazy it is, like, thank gosh for the internet, it was like, it first started off with like me writing about the situation.
Yeah.
And I literally read those journal entries back, and it's like, it's anxiety on paper. Like, if you just read it, it's like literally straight anxiety and insecurity on paper.
Yeah.
And I write, I'm like talking like, oh, why did it not work out? And I write, why? ? Am I not enough? And like, that is the defining theme of like my trauma and my anxiety throughout my entire life.
Yeah.
Was that I never felt enough or worthy of being loved and connected.
Yeah.
And it's like this girl, and again, anyone, right? This person represented like at the core of us as human beings, our experience, we want to feel loved, connected, right? We want that social cohesion, bonding, that like we want to know like we matter and like we belong in the world, and we're not just like, floating.
Yeah.
And like that obviously plays into so many of like our experience that we talked about in high school.
Yeah.
But for someone to represent that huge part of you,
yeah,
and for it to be taken away,
yeah,
it's going to snap back with so much force.
Yeah.
And also in the same way, it's like you're always chasing that. Mm-hmm. It's like you're always trying to make yourself whole through something else outside of yourself.
Yeah.
And like my kind of journey here was like, I was just at such a loss that I had no other options. I was like, I'm at such a low in my life. I don't know where to go. I need answers. And I turned to Google, and like I was just asking all these questions like, why did it not work out with girl? Why did X happen?
No, dude, say like, right? Yeah,
but like, and
yeah,
I came across this Reddit post, like inadvertently, and it was about this topic in like psychology called attachment theory.
Yes.
Yeah, and I read it and I was like, holy shit. Yeah. This sounds so much like me, and like that. So that opened up like a Pandora's box where like I was, and timing wise, this was during like senior year COVID.
Yeah.
Where this happened like right before winter break.
Yeah.
And I was just so, I don't know if I could call it, but like I was so low at that point during that period. And then just like when I got home, it was like I was isolated with my family, which I didn't have a great relationship with my family. It's better now, but like my brother's not there. It's literally just me, my parents in like an unhealthy environment, and I'm just alone and isolated.
Yeah.
And I spent that entire month basically in my room reading, watching videos on psychology, attachment theory, reading things about trauma, anxiety, and I'm just every day just journaling. I'm like watching a video, listening to what they say, and I'm journaling about it. I'm like pausing it, journaling about it, and I'm doing that for an entire month straight, just unpacking everything, unraveling every single string, like line of code that like formed my operating system.
Yeah.
And I come out of that, like going back to school, being like, it feels like this rain cloud that has been over my head my entire life is gone. Because now I understand who I am. I understand all of the conditioning that has been just like slowly layered on top of me throughout my entire life.
Yeah. Wow, that's like really, that's so accelerated too. Like that just all happened in like 1 month of just like, and I think if anything, what that shows is just how much work it takes to understand yourself. Like, like, it's not seen as like work in the way that like people would be like, oh yeah, like I worked so hard today. And you're like, I was in a room journaling the entire day, and nobody's gonna be like, oh, you worked so, but it's so hard.
Oh my gosh.
It's like the emotional energy that takes, and I feel like, what you described is like, I've had very similar experiences to you, but just never so collected. Like, I feel like every little crisis I went through, like things like that in much smaller, more manageable doses, that like kind of collectively, but that, I think that's so important.
Oh yeah.
It's definitely like an awakening of just growing and because that knowledge is powerful.
Of course.
Because now we're able to, when we encounter situations like that, at least be able to be like, I know where this is coming from.
Yes.
That the knowledge is what gives us agency.
Yes.
To feel like there's something we can do to try to address it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or at the very least that like, we're not filled with this, like, why is this happening to me?
Yes.
Kind of thoughts that's really distressing and very anxiety provoking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
just like to chime in there, I mean, the thing is like that was just the start because it definitely took that was I mean that was definitely an hyper accelerated period of growth.
Yeah.
But it took me so much that was like the snowball, but it took me
Yeah.
definitely like the rest of senior because there was still like the residual, right? There's like the
Yeah.
residual piece that you haven't like worked through, and then going through like post grad life as
Yeah.
well, like was just me continuing to use the foundation I had built during that time
Yeah.
to understand myself better, to understand my values, whatnot.
Yeah.
But a few things to address here was like that's the
Yeah.
thing where I talk about like building a relationship with yourself so much.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, it's like people it's like you hear that but you don't understand what it is. But it takes time, it takes rep. It's just as much as like if you're going to the gym or if you're trying to like study for tests, you have to like prepare for it like it's your life.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's like it's not easy. It's like when you're dealing with like things like trauma and whatnot, you are like reliving it essentially. And that is more taxing than just sitting at a desk and tapping away at a computer.
Yeah. It's not that simple,
it's not
right?
Same.
Yeah.
But it's like the thing is, the interesting thing the entire time was like I don't know if you can call it hope or whatever. It was like a lifeline for me. Where I didn't know what I was pursuing. I was just following every single like little like loose thread I could that seemed like it would work.
Yeah.
Because like that's just how low I was, and I was like starting to feel like some hope.
Yeah.
That was like my hope and whatnot.
Was that like it was like desperation that was
yeah, literally. It's like I had no other choice but to figure this out, or else I would literally just be like spiraling because I did spiral.
Yeah.
And
it's like a survival instinct.
Oh yeah, it's like literally it's like if I don't do this, I don't know what's gonna happen to me in the future.
Yeah.
And in that sense, like going through that, like you said, it's like going through that and it sounds crazy to people where like if you just say it, it's like it makes so much sense on paper, but to actually know it for yourself, but like knowing yourself and like who you are and having that internal compass gives you so much agency, and it gives you an understanding of like your sphere of control. Whereas in the past, it seems for both of us, it was just like we're sort of like, we have no agency. We're like victim. It's like the victimhood mentality. It's like you're just like floating. But knowing yourself, no matter what situation you go through, no matter what hardship, you know who you are. You know like what actions you can take that will bring you forward in some direction.
It's developing a sense of groundedness.
Yes.
Yeah, and like I think a stability in terms of your identity, because you don't just morph with whatever the latest thing that people are saying you should be as anymore. You're able to look at those things and be like, hey, like maybe there's some things that I feel like really vibe with me. There's some things that I don't agree with, but you're at least you're able to have that standard of like what you want for your life and what you don't, and you're able to say no a lot more confidently, and you're able to say yes a lot more confidently as well.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'll chime in there really quick. And I do want to I want to hear a lot about like, your cooking journey and whatnot. But that's exactly what it was. Where it was like I started to have the sense of groundedness of who I was. Yeah. It's like now I have the tools, and then post grad life was like me going out into the open world and like slaying like
you were like
inside.
You had your skill points.
Exactly. I'm like now I'm high enough level to like fight these monsters. Like let me. But like literally my experience in New York up until like the point I quit my first job and whatnot was just me constantly using this like toolkit or like sense of self that I had to be like, this is what I want out of my life. It was like first it was like my job, which is like in finance, like one of those jobs. I was like, this is so pointless. I don't want this. What do I? And like using that experience like a little way like reaffirm and ground myself in like what my values are, because this clearly isn't. Yeah. Or something as simple as like, oh, like I don't like drinking. I'm just gonna stop drinking.
They're just not gonna do it.
I don't. It's like, oh, like I don't like going to these bars and clubs and having superficial interactions. Yeah. I'm just gonna stop going. Yeah. I don't like having superficial conversations. I'm just gonna stop
pretending that I like them.
I'm just gonna like not partake in them. And it's just like this constant iteration of like, what do I actually give a shit about in life? Yeah. And like I'm just gonna say yes to things that match that and what don't. And I think that's a beautiful thing where it's like, you're not always going to fully know yourself, but when you have that solid foundation, you can just you just feel equipped. I think that's the key word, equipped, to tackle whatever life throws at you, knowing that it is either going to reconfirm your conviction in yourself and your values or help you understand them more. And it's just like a constant rinse and repeat.
Respect. Yeah. Like mad respect. That's really awesome. Yeah, like it's like a privilege to hear your journey of growth. And how far you've come, and just all of the like everything that you've had to go through, to get there. Like not everything. I mean, this is a summary, obviously,
Sure.
but like just like a glimpse of like the difficulties along the way,
Yeah.
like we can do the cooking thing, but I'm sure that knowing how we've both been like, it always starts with a girl. I know that there's some stories there, for like the separate growth journeys that each like disaster catalyzed in our lives. Like, but yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, there's definitely a lot of cringy stories about experiences with the girls and whatnot, and like that's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But can we pause and take a bathroom break?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but